Good afternoon, everyone. I am Martin Belrose. I will be the moderator for this afternoon session. First, I want to thank you for joining us this afternoon or this morning, depending on where you are in Canada. So before start, I would like to acknowledge that we are located on an unceded Mohawk territory, and we recognize and respect the Ghanaian Gaga Nation as the traditional stewards of these lands and waters. First, Erica Follen, the director of Green Churches Network, will speak to you a few minutes. So please, Erica.
Hi, thank you. So the Green Church Network is a network of Christian communities that want to improve their environmental commitments and care for creation in their buildings and in their communities. We welcome all Christian denominations from across Canada, and that's not only in churches, but other forms of institutions like colleges and schools, monasteries, and centers. We allocate a page on our website for registered communities to highlight themselves, their projects, their actions, and that's used to inspire and to educate fellow Christians. The network also provides support by offering practical tools which are oriented towards action, education, and spirituality, all of which can be used to integrate creation care into day-to-day church life. So what started out as a program 15 years ago is now a registered nonprofit charity. We're based out of Montreal and we have strong roots here in Quebec. We're in 5 provinces, but we're always eager to expand our reach to all the provinces and territories. And to do that, we would foresee having regional coordinators. So since it's our anniversary year, and considering the stress this pandemic has caused our communities, we have waived the annual registration fees for 2021, which are normally only a $100 contribution. We're hoping that this will encourage new registrations as we really want to spread creation care and put it at the forefront of all of our actions, particularly considering the urgency of the climate crisis. So with that, I thank you all for logging in, and I'll pass it over to Martin. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Erica. Just before introducing our keynote speaker, I would like to make a little reflection on the Bible text. I will first read the text and after have some comments on this text. It is from Genesis chapter 18, verses 1 to 5. The Lord appeared to Abraham near the great trees of Mamre, while he was sitting at the entrance to his tent in the heat of the day. Abraham looked up and saw 3 men standing nearby. When he saw them, he hurried from the entrance of his tent to meet them and bowed low to the ground. He said, "If I have found favor in your eyes, my Lord, do not pass your servant by. Let a little water be brought, and then you may all wash your feet and rest under this tree. Let me get you something to eat so you can be refreshed, and then go on your way. Now that you have come to your servant." "Very well," they answered. "Do as you say." So this reflection today, the presentation that Agnes Richard will do, have some concrete issues about what can we do during the extended summertime heat waves that we are suffering now. And this passage is very interesting to inspire us. First, it is the Theophany of Memory. So it is the appearance of God himself in the history before the incarnation in our Lord Jesus. And also we have something else very interesting in this passage. Okay, it's on during the heatest hours of the day, but also there's something a little bit, there's a paradox there. Abraham looked up and saw three men standing nearby. And then the text says, he hurried from the entrance to his tent to meet them and bowed low to the ground. And some translation just said that he ran from the entrance of his tent to meet the three visitors. And it's not very coherent, because if they are nearby him, you just don't have to run toward them. But it is one of the criteria of our hospitality, of the Christian, Jewish and Christian hospitality. It is to go toward the others. So Agnes will have a reflection on what can we do against the climate changes, and concretely. And this reflection is just about hospitality. Keep in mind that as Christian, as followers of the Jewish and Christian tradition, we must put in practice that kind of hospitality, which means to go toward the others, not just waiting passively that they come to us, but go to meet them where they are and offering them something concrete to make them suffer less than they are suffering now. So we just invite the Holy Spirit to be part of this time this afternoon, and to inspire us, open our minds and our heart to receive this conference this afternoon. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. So now, Agnes Richard is coordinator at Global Catholic Climate Movement Canada. Agnes received the training from both Honorable Al Gore's Climate Reality Project and the Global Catholic Climate Movement as a Laudato Si Animator. With a team of lay partners and the Office for Discipleship and Parish Life, Agnes planned and implemented a series of workshops called Change Starts With Us for the Catholic Diocese of Hamilton. With the Lighthouse Pilot Project Steering Committee, Agnes worked closely with Greening Sacred Spaces, staff in Hamilton, and CREW, Community Resilience to Extreme Weather, to develop extreme weather resilience hubs in Hamilton, Ontario. So Agnes, welcome. And now the mic is yours.
Thank you very much, Martin. And I'm just going to take a minute and bring my slides up. Okay. I want to thank especially Renaud for inviting me to take part in one of your year 15 anniversary webinars. It's a great honor. Thank you also, Erica and Martin, for your words and for your introduction. I want to let you all know that I am coming to you from Southern Ontario, the traditional lands of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabeg, Huron-Wendat, and Mississaugas of the Credit. I am living on lands that are part of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. Congratulations to the Green Churches Network for your 15th anniversary year. The leadership and resources that you've provided for people of faith have been both practical and inspirational. And, oh, you can't see it. I have with me Greening Your Church, one of the first publications the Green Churches Network did. I'm going to look at Parable of the Good Samaritan, and look at it through contemporary eyes, but also specifically how Pope Francis addresses it in his latest encyclical, Fratelli Tutti, and how we can apply that to helping our neighbors during the summertime. So just a quick recap on the parable itself. On one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus, and he said, "Teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" Jesus replied, "What is written in the law? How do you interpret it? How do you read it?" And the young man answered, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." "You've answered correctly," Jesus replied. "Do this and you will live." But the young man wanted to justify himself in speaking out, so he asked, "Who is my neighbor?" In Fratelli Tutti, Pope Francis, his most recent encyclical, began by saying, "I offer this encyclical as a modest contribution to reflection, in the hope that in the face of present-day attempts to eliminate or ignore other people, we may prove capable of responding with a vision of fraternity and social friendship that will not remain at the level of words." Jesus transformed the approach of the young man and asks us and the young man to consider ourselves and not try to decide who is our neighbor, who is close enough in proximity to us or in likeness to us or in our speaking, but rather how can we become neighbors to everyone. In the parable, we learn that the man went and bandaged the wounds of an injured person on the road, pouring oil and wine on his wounds. And then he put the man on his own donkey and brought him to an inn to take care of him. The next day, the Samaritan took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. Look after him, he said, "and when I return, I will reimburse you." Jesus asks which of the 3 on the road was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers. And we know that both a priest and a lawyer had passed by before the Good Samaritan. And of course, the young man answered, the one who had mercy on the injured man. Jesus says, "Go and do likewise." Pope Francis encourages us to follow the example of Saint Francis when we delve into this work. We should cultivate a spirit of listening and caring for all people, no matter their circumstances or point of view. Pope Francis himself exemplifies this approach in his synodal method of dialogue with marginalized, indigenous, and outcast communities and individuals. As we saw in his work on the Synod for the Amazon, preferential option for the poor is high in Pope Francis' concerns for caring for the earth and all its creatures. In Fratelli Tutti, Pope Francis reflects on the Good Samaritan again by holding up a mirror to situations of neglected neighbors today. The relegation of the elderly to a sad and lonely existence is a subtle way of stating that our society is all about us, that our individual concerns are the only thing that matters. In this way, what is thrown away are not only food and dispensable objects, but often human beings as well. In pointing out the life of Saint Francis, Pope Francis suggests that we need a community that supports and helps us, in which we can help one another to look ahead as children of the same earth, which is our common home. Each of us brings richness of our own beliefs, convictions, and our voices to our brothers and sisters all. Now, certainly, the Good Samaritan had other plans for his day, but he was also prepared in other ways. In preparing for himself and his travel, he had with him or adapted things that he had to become bandages and dressings for the wounds of an injured man. He had money on hand that he freely gave in service of another to take care of an overnight stay and any other needs that the injured man might have. But most of all, the Good Samaritan gave his time. And both Jesus and Pope Francis call us to do the same. The parable shows us how, as a community, we can, the community can be rebuilt by men and women who identify with the vulnerability of others. Those who reject the creation of a society of exclusion and act instead as neighbors, lifting up and rehabilitating the fallen for the sake and the good of all. Together we can seek in truth and in dialogue, in relaxed conversation and passionate debate, a way to take care of the needs of others. The process of building fraternity, be it local or universal, can only be taken by spirits that are free and open to authentic encounters. And Pope Francis himself has recognized that during heat waves in particular, elderly people who are lonely are often forgotten. The coronavirus, the pandemic, has pointed out to us some of the grave errors in the way our society operates. This is one way that we can learn to include everyone in the way our society is built, in the way our neighborhoods and the way our communities are built going forward. Pope Francis suggests that the parable summons us to rediscover our vocations as citizens of our respective nations and of the entire world, builders of a new social bond. This summons is ever new, yet it is grounded in a fundamental law of our being. We are called to direct society to the pursuit of the common good, and with this purpose in mind, to persevere in consolidating our political and social order, its fabric of relations and human goals. By his actions, the Good Samaritan showed that the existence of each and every individual is deeply tied to that of others. Life is not simply time that passes. Life is a time for interactions. In the aftermath of the 2018 heat wave in Canada and North America, there was an article in CBC Montreal that told of the deaths that were suffered in the province of Quebec. In Ontario, we looked to your numbers and realized that we needed to track similarly what happens in heat waves to people who are vulnerable. And those people are the elderly for sure, but they're also homeless people. They are people of low income, single mothers with small children. Small children are very much susceptible to heat, as are elderly people. And in the end, they had firefighters, police officers, and community members going door to door to check on people. It was noted in this article, and I'll include the link to it afterwards, that there's still work to be done to put in place a registry of vulnerable people. Communities of faith can help in this work. Who better knows the vulnerable people in our local communities? Who is better poised to help those neighbors? So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what happens in a heat wave. This is a very small scientific look, and heat waves are made worse by what happens in cities. You can see this graph with what looks like the red mountain in behind it. In rural areas, in farmland, in parkland, and even on the fringes of suburban areas, the temperatures are cooler, and that is because of the green spaces that are available. As you move closer to the core of cities, the heat increases because of the density of people, because of pollution, because of paved areas that absorb heat rather than reflect it, and because of a lack of green spaces in comparison to rural areas where there's farmland. Green spaces, trees in particular, make a big difference in the heat levels within a city. This infrared image on the right is from Australia, but it shows in extreme detail the difference in temperature between a treed area and the shade underneath it at 25 degrees Celsius, and the pavement just beyond the shade at 45 degrees Celsius. Now, we don't often see that big a spread, but a 10-degree difference is not unheard of in Canadian cities and makes an incredible difference to the people who are seeking shelter. If they can't find green space, and this is particularly homeless people that I have in mind, then it makes a big difference on their personal health. Now, one thing I'd like to suggest is that when we consider what happens in heat waves, one of the first things that we should do, and that perhaps what communities of faith can do, is educate both themselves and their neighbors on what the health effects are of heat waves, what the symptoms are, and how serious they are. And there are several levels. Heat exhaustion is one, heat stroke is another. And when you get beyond that, definitely emergency medical treatment is needed, because heat stroke can lead to death, and we know that that has happened. And people who are vulnerable are the elderly, as I said, the very young, people who work outside. But one of the interesting things I found in the work that I was doing in Hamilton is that oftentimes people living alone of any age in certain locations are more susceptible to heat-related illness than others. We found in a study in a downtown neighborhood in Hamilton that people who live in the attic apartments of 100-year-old or century buildings, homes that may have only been 3 or 4 stories high, but they're living in the attic, are also extremely susceptible to these kinds of negative heat events to their health. People are designed to live in temperatures that are below 26 degrees. If we find ourselves consistently for 2 or 3 days in a row or more living in spaces, sleeping in spaces that go above 30 degrees, 32, 36 degrees, then we are seriously putting our health at risk. And understanding both the vulnerable people and where they are is an important part of learning what we can do to help them. And these are some suggestions. This is put out by the World Health Organization. There are other suggestions from the Red Cross, but there are still other suggestions from people who are concerned about climate change and how our cities work. Some of these are things that can be acted upon by a few individuals or by a certain church congregation or faith group, and others require working with municipalities to interweave our efforts with theirs. So an example of that, okay, this I'm putting this up for your information. It's something that you can look up later. This is a study that I was in part involved with through Faith in the Common Good and their Greening Sacred Spaces program in 2017, 18, and 19. And there were 3 communities in Ontario that took part in what we knew at the beginning as the Lighthouse Project, to create community hubs from faith organizations, from faith buildings, to help their neighbors understand possible hazards due to climate change in their own location, and what a church can do to help assist in those situations. So this is what that study talks about. And it talked about all different kinds of climatic disruption, not just heat wave, but heat wave was one of the things that we could easily assess. And that's where some of the information came from about attic apartments and things like that. Okay, so one of the first things any faith organization can do if they want to consider themselves a community hub or a helping hand in the event of a heat wave is to first know what is already in place, who to call to understand if in fact a heat alert has been called in your area. That's the 211 codes that you can call and find out. And then learning about what are expected standards from the government for workers is helpful to understand how those standards apply to people's living situations. So in terms of slowing down the amount of work that we do, doing it in the shade, keeping out of the sun as much as possible, hydrating and providing opportunities to stop and slow down and to drink water frequently. These things are already well documented, but to begin understanding what a church community could do to help their community, they have to know what's already in place, and that's where you would begin this work. And then there are things that you know, in some cases seem obvious, but aren't necessarily obvious until it's written down and a plan is made in advance of a heat wave to deal with it. Things like creating a list of who you know are in Ontario. In our church, we call it shut-ins, people who we know don't get out for health reasons or because they're they don't have family close by or anyone who checks on them. Excuse me. By knowing who those people are, you have a better idea of who will need, you know, the potential assistance from your members during a heat wave. And this is very, very relatable to what we're living with right now through COVID-19, because lonely and vulnerable neighbors now need perhaps assistance with food. They need someone to talk to, someone who need, you know, someone who shows that these people are cared about. So some of the pictures that I have here, this little girl peeking over the fences is an example of checking in and chatting with neighbors who you know are isolated and vulnerable. Taking it to another step, in our work in Hamilton and in Southern Ontario, Brampton and Toronto, we considered places of faith reevaluating their thinking so they became a hub of support for the community. In this case, in a heat wave, a cooling center. So many of the churches in Quebec are big, beautiful stone buildings that their basements, even in the hot heat of summer, are much cooler without air conditioning than in many of the living spaces around them. So how wonderful would it be for a church to put in place the opportunity for neighbors to come and visit and come inside, use the basement as a cooling space. And this could be at many different levels. Ideally, offering a little bit of food and drink is nice. Some places consider that people might have to be there for a long time. So they provide board games or accessibility to music or a place to plug in cell phones and laptops if people need to work there. And then another broader way of assisting a municipality with the heat levels is planting trees. And there are beautiful, beautiful church grounds that have wonderful parkland, and I know that sometimes there is a fear of vandalism and places being misused, but in the case of a heat wave, I can't help but feel myself how cool and beautiful these Stations of the Cross around St. Anne de Beaupré feel, just even looking at the picture. So taking that idea and transforming downtown parish grounds to shaded parkland is another way that we can act to adapt and alleviate heat stress in our cities. So there are other ways that we can work with our municipalities as well. In New York, to relieve the urban heat island effect, several years ago, they started a program called Cool City. And what they've done is painted white onto the rooftops of as many buildings as they can in Manhattan to reflect the heat of the sun rather than to have it absorbed by hot black tar roofs. And similarly, in places in California, they are painting black pavement white to reflect the sunlight as well. All of this helps. Not any single one of these things are a solution on their own, but all of them together add up to a better quality of life for the people in those communities. Some communities are also, I think Toronto is considering or has already done so, the idea of rooftop gardens. And this not only adds to cooling, but can become places of food production. So there's no doubt that these kinds of things, they take a lot of planning and a fair amount of expertise to execute, but depending on resources like grants that might be available or the willingness of specialized people to give of their own knowledge to make these things happen, it can take you a long way. Okay. Now, one of the other things that is stressed in Fratelli Tutti is that we don't need to do this alone. Green Churches Network, Faith in the Common Good, David Suzuki Foundation, there are so many organizations with suggestions on how to work together. And aside from that, there are professionals in our provinces and in our cities who would welcome our help and our support, both in the practical, as you see in this picture, planting trees, but also in advocating with your government officials as to what you would like to see happen in your cityscapes. And we are encouraged to go out and do likewise, as the Good Samaritan did. And finally, in Fratelli Tutti, Pope Francis says that love is more than just a series of benevolent actions. Our love for others, for who they are, moves us to seek the best for their lives. Only by cultivating this way of relating to one another will we make possible a social friendship that excludes no one and is a fraternity that is open to all. And Martin in his opening reflection mentioned hospitality, fraternity, hospitality, care and love for each other are the grounding points of the gospel and of the world that we would like to see created for ourselves and for our future generations. Now, this is something that I can leave up or I can send to Renaud, but it is a list of links to possible resources to help you think about assisting during heat waves in a more concrete way. Some of them are scientific reports, some of them are examples of efforts that have been made in other communities. So you're welcome to use these at any point. I can end there now, Renaud, and I'll hand it over for questions. I'll stop sharing at the moment.
Thank you very much, Agnes, for this presentation. Very interesting. I think you suggest very concrete paths to do something in our communities. While you write your questions in the chat, I have I was talking about. I have a question for you, Agnes. I was thinking about. I lived for 10 years, a little bit more than 10 years in Colombia, and my wife comes from a very hot place. I mean, in weather, hot place of Colombia. Also politically, but I mean, a question of weather. So in 26 degrees, it is for her grandmother too cold to live. And actually, yeah, once they just put the fan just beside me because I was sweating a lot, and the grandmother was just beside me, and she was cold while I was sweating. Yes, so people are used to live or appreciate weather very differently depending of where they are from. Actually, the people from the Atlantic coast in Colombia call the city of Bogota, which is in the mountains, so it's not so hot. It's around 17 and 19 degrees as maximum, and all year long. And they call it the fridge. So there's something very subjective also like that. Now in our communities in Canada, we have people from everywhere around the world. I just saw this morning we have 24 degrees, and I saw a woman with a winter hat, and she was saying, yeah, but maybe it's just the way she understands this weather now is different. So in the help that we can bring to the people, we also have to take into account their culture, what they specifically need. For example, maybe for many people, the heat is not the problem in Montreal for people from somewhere else, but the smog can be much harder for them to stand it. And so do you have some, or there exists some tools to understand cultures and what we can do at this level concerning the weather and how they treat heat or cold for someone in other times? Or it doesn't, or it's not developed yet, that kind of tools?
I don't know of specific tools that assess how people from different cultures, from different places in the world, feel heat or feel cold. But I agree with you. At my church, we helped sponsor a Syrian family. And what was very comfortable summertime temperatures for us, they were cold. And when I went into their house, any time of the year, I was overheated because of the temperatures that they kept their homes at, which was comfortable for them. But I was uncomfortable. So yes, understanding the differences in how people's bodies are acclimatized depending on where they're from is helpful, but also understanding how they might feel extremes and how we might feel extremes. So what climate change can potentially bring us, and I think we're already seeing it, is a strong flip in extremes. Here in Ontario, I was trying my best to keep my garden heated from frost for 3 or 4 days, 1 week, and within 3 days we were up over 30-degree temperatures. And that quick shift, especially if the shift to heat lasts for 3 or 4 or 5 days and people aren't able to cool off, means that we in this place haven't had a chance to acclimatize to it. So our own Canadian bodies will react in different ways to that. And you're right, people from other countries will say, finally the heat is here. But then we go back to cold weather again. So climate change is going to bring us more of these bouncing around extremes. Mm-hmm. But I think I can't put my finger on any particular study that says how different people's makeup react to temperature. I think some of that will become part of understanding our own communities and who's there, and understanding who will be vulnerable in our own communities. And definitely cultural differences is part of that. How people choose to dress, whether they choose, and this is where poverty comes in. People on low incomes in the summertime may have to choose between buying food or plugging in the air conditioner. And if the air conditioner and the hydro prices or electricity prices are high, they may choose not to cool their space. They may choose that food is more important. And that, that's a very terrible, difficult choice to be put in. But people are faced with those choices sometimes. And knowing who those people are from whatever demographic or whatever age group is part of our task in understanding how best we can help. I hope that answers the question a little bit.
Yes, thank you very much. A question here from Wendy, who says, Indigenous issues come to mind these days. What are the efforts made to help First Nations navigate the changes to the climate in their communities, either in cities or in the north?
That's a very interesting question, because I was preparing a webinar back in the springtime to look at Indigenous peoples in Northern Canada, and I was reflecting on the book, The Right to be Cold by Sheila Watt-Cloutier. And what I discovered was that Indigenous peoples want to share their knowledge of coping with the environment and with climate with us. They don't necessarily want us to rescue them from a situation that we've created. They want us to work with them with the knowledge that they have. So as an example, in the Northwest Territories and Nunavut, there are young people being trained as land defenders, but also as helpers. And they are protecting government, what's the word I'm looking for? Government protected zones for biodiversity and for other things. And it allows the young people to be back out on the land where they belong, to learn the traditions from their elders on how to live on the land. And they strongly believe that they have the tools to help us look at our land and our environments differently, and to consider ourselves a united part of everything that's around us, not just people who are using this space a finite set of benefits for us. We are part of it in a symbiotic relationship, and they feel that what they have to teach us in the ways of those relationships will help all of society move forward in protecting and living out the values that the gospel teaches us. But they don't necessarily want us to rescue them. And that's one thing that I learned, especially about looking at people in the North. They have definite challenges with melting permafrost and lack of access through what used to be permanently frozen ice roads that are now not frozen throughout the year. But they are adapting. And what they want us to do is to get climate change under control, to ramp back and scale down our emissions and our pollutions that are causing the problem. Because once that is back, you know, in a situation where we're not disrupting all of our global environment, then they can live with and work with that, and they invite our participation in what they are doing.
Thank you. Another question, two questions we have here. Which bishop of Hamilton contracted this project first, and how has your research been shared with the churches in the Diocese of Hamilton? Thank you, Pauline.
Okay. It was Bishop Crosby. We worked through the Office of Discipleship and Parish Life to bring those workshops together. And just so you know, in my short bio, they were two different projects. What I did around community resilience hubs was with Environment Hamilton, which is a local environment education and advocacy group. And what I did with the bishops and deaneries in Hamilton was specifically around Laudato Si, and my training as a Laudato Si animator. So there were two different projects, but I can speak and bring information both ways between them. And the group in Hamilton, it actually started with lay people who knew Laudato Si well, were excited about that encyclical and the messages that are included in it, and wanted to hear more at our parish levels. We actually brought or devised a program based on the Jesuit Forum for Social Faith and Justice, their dialogue guide on our care of our common home, and presented that to the Discipleship and Parish Life office at the Chancery of the Diocese of Hamilton, and asked permission to run these workshops. So at that point, that's when we had the support of the bishop to put word out to the deaneries that we would host those. Now there are 7 deaneries in Hamilton, in the Hamilton Diocese. There was varying degrees of participation. While the Chancery office put out the news and invitations through their news channels and information channels to each parish in the diocese. In Hamilton and in Halton Peel and in Brantford areas, they were very well received. We had a good turnout at the workshops, and then other ones we didn't have anybody come. So and to be honest, since then there's been a small amount of reciprocal asks to go back and have these conversations. Now, granted, COVID has obviously affected that. When churches are closed, then neither are the Catholic Women's League and the Knights of Columbus and local chapters of St. Vincent de Paul meeting either. So the opportunities in the last year and a half to speak about these things have been severely cut back. But that started as a group of lay people and we brought a proposal to our bishop, and he approved it, and we went forward from there. We did all the organizing to find the parishes who would host the workshops, and the diocese did the advertising to bring people to them.
Thank you. Renaud reminds us that there's a book published in the last years, I think, The Right to be Cold, Le Droit au Froid in French.
Yes.
At the Éco-Société by Sheila Watt Cloutier.
Yes.
You know, did you read this book, or?
I have followed Sheila, and I've been trying to get her book from the library, but there's a number of people who have it ahead of me. But she also has a lot of wonderful YouTube videos that you can listen to her speak. And when I was saying that Indigenous people want to work with us on a reciprocal basis because they have knowledge to share, that was her I was talking about. This is what she proposes. You know, I was speaking with someone who was talking about Indigenous financial opportunities, and there are upwards of 600 or more different Indigenous nations in Canada. So the response and the answer of one, they will be the first to say is not the answer of all. So again, that was Sheila Cloutier's response to climate change and the effects that it's having on her communities. But someone else who's living in central Manitoba may have a different response. They may suggest that settler peoples assist them in opposing hydroelectric dams that flood large portions of what would have been their traditional hunting grounds. Every sector of the country has different types of issues related to climate and Indigenous rights that should not be lumped together as one issue. There are many, many different issues, and one of the things that has been suggested to me, if you really want to assist Indigenous peoples, is to look at their legal campaigns and the funds that are needed to keep those campaigns going. So I can send a link to an Indigenous organization that's doing climate work, and their legal funds to take any level of government or a corporation to court to protect their rights. So they have, through the treaties, very strong rights that are written into Canada's law. And they have the ability, maybe better than we do, to fight some degrading practices by multinational corporations or by governments. And they ask our support in the way of finances to keep these legal battles going. Now, the other thing we can do is support something like the current bill C-15 to put the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People into law in Canada. If that was in place here, they would probably not have the need to engage in so many legal battles with corporations and with government if UNDRIP was recognized as part of the law of Canada.
Thank you very much. We have more questions, but we will stop here to respect the time we allowed for this session. So thank you very much, Agnes, for your presentation. Very, very helpful, very interesting, and I really appreciate that you give us a very realistic path to do something now, right now, efficiently in our communities, not only in our thoughts and no, but very concrete. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. And I have no problem if people afterwards have further questions. I have a hard time pinpointing organizations off the top of my head, but I can certainly send those as links afterwards if you want to send them out to participants.
Okay, thank you very much. So if you want to, Simon, who asked some questions, if you want to give maybe your email address to Agnes or something like that, and you can be in touch. Thank you also to Erica Follen, the director of Green Church Network, and Renaud Grégoire, who is behind everything we have done this afternoon. Also, this series of conferences from Green Churches will continue the fall time. So be aware, and you certainly will receive some invitation for the continuing of these sessions. Thank you very much, and have a good afternoon.
Thank you very much.